Hello friends, I welcome you all to another edition of Daily News Analysis. So in this particular edition, we are going to discuss some very important and interesting articles that are part of Hindu as well as Indian Express newspapers. The first important article that we are going to discuss is about Medicine Nobel 2025, important update from the perspective of GS3 Science and Technology part, from the perspective of GS2 Health as well, because this particular Medicine Nobel in 2025 has been awarded to the scientist who actually demystified the immune system, the human immune system. So important analysis. Another important article that we are going to discuss is about START treaty and its extension. So this is the arms control treaty between the United States and Russia, whether we are going to see some sort of talks between the two countries so that this particular treaty can be extended beyond its time in 2026 or not. Important update from the perspective of GS3 defense part, from the perspective of GS2 international relations as well. The third important article that we are going to discuss is about Supreme Court to decide on security transaction tax constitutionality. So important update again from the perspective of GS3 economy part. Apart from that, GS2 judiciary part also, this particular article is very important. So knowing the basics of STT, security transaction tax, and how it is different from say capital gains tax is important analysis here. Another important article is about drugs quality standards and whether the companies are complying with those standards or not. So in the wake of recent deaths of children in MP, this particular analysis is important from the perspective of GS2 Health. At the same time, GS3 economy as well, because the pharmaceutical sector is very important sector when it comes to India's economy. In decoded section, which is important from the perspective of mains particularly, we are going to take a look at interesting article titled Reforming Passive Euthanasia in India. In recent times, we have seen the debates about active euthanasia, particularly when it comes to UK. Whether India should allow active euthanasia or what sort of reform we can actually take when it comes to the regime of passive euthanasia which is currently operational in India. Important analysis again from the perspective of GS2 Health here. So stay tuned for that particular analysis as well. So the first important article that we are going to discuss is about Medicine Nobel of 2025. So in current news, the Medicine Nobel for scientists who demystified the immune system. So essentially what has happened now, the Medicine Nobel has been announced in recent times. The Nobel Prize for 2025 in Physiology or Medicine goes to Mary E. Brunkov, Fred Ramsdell and Shimon Sakaguchi for their discoveries concerning peripheral immune system. So for their discoveries on peripheral immune system particularly, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences announced this particular Medicine Nobel to these three scientists. Two of these scientists are from say United States and one is from Japan. So what they have done, what their contribution is, we are going to discuss what exactly is their contribution when it comes to say the demystifying our immune system. Our immune system is particularly is an evolutionary masterpiece that protect us from pathogens, disease causing pathogens in particular. So essentially it is really unique immune system. So most of the time how our immune system functions is a mystery that has been solved over the period of time by these particular scientists, but still we are yet to learn a lot of things, because many times there are autoimmune diseases as well. Autoimmune disease, what is the meaning of autoimmune disease? It is a condition when your own immune system mistakenly attacks or damages your body's healthy cells. So essentially rather than attacking the foreign invaders or disease causing pathogens, so the immune system mistakenly attacks the healthy cells itself. So that is called autoimmune diseases. So essentially when it comes to example part of autoimmune diseases, there is type 1 diabetes, there is lupus, there is celiac diseases, etc. So these are examples of autoimmune diseases. So to certain extent these particular scientists' work is very revolutionary when it comes to finding the solution to autoimmune diseases. So they discovered the regulatory T cells particularly. So T cells and B cells are part of immune system of humans particularly. See, most of the time they are part of active immunity. So there is passive immunity, then there is active immunity. Active immunity in particular has memory. So essentially it will remember future pathogens. So that's why the WBCs, the lymphocytes involved in this particular active immunity are sort of clubbed into T cells. There are B cells as well. We are going to see what's exactly is the difference between T cells and B cells. So this particular discovery of these particular three scientists concerns about regulatory T cells. So, there are different types of T cells. There are memory T cells, there are CD4 T cells as well, and then there is this regulatory T cells. Regulatory T cells are also called TREGs, regulatory T cells. So, their discoveries have been decisive for our understanding of how the immune system functions and why do we not all develop serious autoimmune diseases. As I earlier said, why particular some people are say vulnerable to autoimmune diseases, that particular analysis is very important, and these scientists research on regulatory T cells have actually given so much of the deeper understanding when it comes to how autoimmune say diseases work. So, last year the medicine Nobel was jointly awarded to Victor Ambros, Gary Rukun for the discovery of microRNA and its post-transcriptional gene revolution. Remember the 2024 medicine Nobel as well. I am not going to go too deep into say microRNA and how what's their role exactly. So, our current focus is on 2025 Nobel, but you must know in 2024 which particular discovery or which particular technology got the medicine Nobel. So, important from the perspective of prelims here. So, the prize carry this particular Nobel prize carry a cash reward of 11 million Swedish kroner, nearly $1.2 million, and will be awarded on December 10 particularly. The Nobel prize was created by the Swedish inventor Alfred Nobel, who in his will dictated that his estate should be used to fund prizes to those who during the preceding year have conferred the greatest benefit to the humankind. So, it is establishment of the Nobel Prize itself is the result of the Swedish inventor Alfred Nobel's will. So, he wanted to give the prizes to those who have contributed immensely to the greatest benefit of humankind through say science. Although there are Nobels when it comes to literature, there is Nobels when it comes to economics as well. So, now in this particular medicine Nobel, let us look at the scientists and their contribution. So, the first and foremost contribution is of Shimon Sakaguchi, the Japanese scientist. So, in 1995, when researchers believed that immune tolerance developed through a process called central tolerance, he discovered a previously unknown class of immune cells which protect the body from autoimmune diseases. So, this particular regulatory T cells were first observed and discovered by Shimon Sakaguchi way back in 1995. He observed, he actually discovered previously unknown class of immune cells, essentially regulatory T cells. These are called TREGs now, remember that. So, he is the first one who is able to discover TREGs in 1995. Then comes Mary Brunkow and Fred Ramsdale made another key discovery way back in 2011. They discovered that a specific mouse strain was particularly vulnerable to autoimmune diseases because they have mutation in a gene which they named FOXP3. So, they also shared that mutations in the human equivalent of this gene caused serious autoimmune diseases, IPEX particularly. So, particularly based on the research of Shimon Sakaguchi, both these scientists actually discovered a mutation in a gene, particularly they named it FOXP3 gene, and they also showed that this particular mutation is responsible for serious autoimmune diseases, particularly IPEX. So, no need to remember all these specifics here, but remember that these two scientists actually continued the discoveries of specialized regulatory T cells, say first actually discovered by Shimon Sakaguchi way back in 1995. After 2011 particularly, 2 years later to be exact, Sakaguchi linked these discoveries and proved that FOXP3 gene governs the development of the cells that he identified in 1995. So, this particular mutation that Mary Brunkow and Fred Ramsdale called FOXP3 gene, actually its movement, its development is governed by the same T cells that he discovered way back in 1995. So, regulatory T cells themselves govern this particular mutation to certain extent. These cells, now known as regulatory T cells, monitor other immune cells and ensure that our immune system tolerates our own tissues. So, essentially the regulatory T cells are sort of a police when it comes to overall immune system of ours, because they actually prevent the or monitor other immune cells and ensure that our immune system tolerates our own tissues. So, essentially why only some people are say vulnerable to autoimmune diseases, but majority of them are not vulnerable. Why? Because there are regulatory T cells which are active. So, what they do is they actually monitor other immune cells and ensure that other immune cells does not harm or does not invade the healthy cells. So, essentially, as I earlier said, sort of they prevent the autoimmune diseases themselves. But sometimes in some people there is gene mutation, then there are other genetic factors, or there are many trigger factors which actually trigger autoimmune diseases. Most of the time autoimmune diseases are genetic. So, that is why to certain extent in the case of autoimmune diseases, the working of regulatory T cells is very much a problem. But in healthy adults particularly, this particular T cells, regulatory T cells in particular, actually protect our own immune system from its own immune cells from attacking other healthy cells. Remember that. So, how regulatory T cells protect us? This is also very, very important. As I earlier said, the immune system, which the committee called an evolutionary masterpiece, protects us from diseases first by differentiating pathogens from the body's own cells and then by attacking these invading microbes. That is true, very true. That is the basic working of say our immune system. Sort of they create antibodies to actually tackle that particular pathogen. So, there is antigen antibody reaction and then there is locking between them, and essentially they flush out the whole pathogens from the system itself. To try to evade the immune system, the pathogens most of the time develops similarities to human cells as a form of camouflage. So, pathogens become also smart. They essentially develop similarities to human cells in such a way that it will act as a camouflage. So, if pathogens camouflage themselves successfully, this can lead to sort of a biological friendly fire in which body's immune system attacks its own cells. So, body's immune system is not able to say differentiate between the healthy cells and the pathogen, because the pathogen has been camouflaged. So, in this particular case, the body's immune system attacks the body's healthy cells in a way unable to tell the difference between the invading pathogens and what was already there. Thus, the immune system must distinguish what to attack and what not to tolerate. So, here comes the role of regulatory T cells. It should also be able to identify our own healthy cells so that our body does not turn upon itself. When this identification does not happen properly, people develop autoimmune diseases. So, as I earlier said, this particular identification, this is where the role of regulatory T cells comes into picture. Also, in case of organ or stem cell like a bone marrow transplant, there is always the danger of immune system attacking the newly transplanted cells, because our immune system consider these newly transplanted cells as an invading pathogen. Thus, an understanding of how the immune system works and how the signal to attack or not attack is given and is executed is really very important. So, that is why the discovery of these particular scientists and how the regulatory T cell mechanism is triggered, what sort of mutations are responsible for this particular trigger is important in this regard. The immune system's work is done by T cells, while helper T cells patrol the body and raise an alert when they detect an attack. The killer T cells attack the invader, that is virus or any other pathogen. See, T cells immune system work is done by T cells. So, T cells are a sort of type of WBCs, white blood cells. There are helper T cells which patrol the body and raise the alert when they detect an attack. Then there are killer T cells, they attack the invader directly. For example, there is virus or even bacteria. Then the thymus, particularly located behind the sternum, was long thought to play a key role in the immune system, especially in children. It acts as a training ground for T cells. So, in thymus, that is where T cells are sort of trained, allowing only those that can distinguish between the body's own cells and invaders to enter the bloodstream. T cells that fail this test are not released, ensuring that only properly functioning cells help defend the body. This is very, very important here. So, T cells are essentially associated with thymus. Remember that. You may get a direct question in this regard in prelims. So, remember T cells are directly associated with thymus. That is where T cells are trained. Essentially, our immune system trains these T cells so that they can actually differentiate, or they can trigger the mechanism of differentiation between, say, healthy cells and invading pathogens who have been camouflaged. Regulatory T cells, particularly often called TREGs, as I earlier said, play a vital role in maintaining immune system balance. They are like the brakes of the immune system, preventing it from overreacting and causing damage to the body's own tissues. So, this is the basic mechanism that I was talking about from the start itself. Regulatory T cells play a crucial role in maintaining immune system balance and preventing excessive or misdirected immune response that can cause damage to our own tissues. So, these are some of the specific mechanisms. I already discussed with you how these T cells are triggered and where exactly they are trained. So, just go through this particular slide here. So, for example, a T cell that has slipped through the test in the thymus reacts to the fragments from one of the body's proteins, particularly. Regulatory T cells discover that the attack is mistake and calm it down, thus preventing autoimmune diseases. So, you can clearly see how harmful T cells are eliminated in this particular diagram here. So, there is a thymus. Thymus is where all the things happen when it comes to regulatory T cells. So, what is the significance of this particular discovery? The discoveries of regulatory T cells and FOXP3 gene have launched a new field of immune regulation research, and with significant implications for human health, because they will give further solution to the autoimmune disease problem. Particularly in cancer also, tumors are often surrounded by many regulatory T cells which protect them from immune attack. Researchers are investing how to dismantle this particular protective wall so that the immune system can better reach and destroy cancerous cells. So, as I said, there are certain sort of downsides to mechanism of regulatory T cells as well, because in case of cancer also they protect these cancerous cells. So, essentially these cells also themselves get deceived by cancer. So, how to actually overcome this particular resistance by regulatory T cells is also very important field, so that this protective wall of regulatory T cells is broken and we can actually trigger the mechanism of our immunity, so that cancer gets flushed out. Conversely, in autoimmune diseases, strategies aim to boost regulatory T cells so that they can stop the attacking cells from destroying the body. So, on the other hand, there are autoimmune diseases where we want to actually boost the regulatory T cells so that they can stop the attacking cells from destroying the body itself. Better understanding of the immune system can also help in making sure that the body does not reject the transplanted organs. As I earlier said, many times our body rejects the new transplant, for example, bone marrow transplant in particular. So, let us look at some of the basics of the immune system now. I am not going to go too detail into the immune system. Our immune system is a evolutionary masterpiece, as I earlier said. One of the immune system's marvel is its ability to identify pathogens and differentiating them from body's own cells. As I earlier said, there is innate immune system, there is adaptive immune system. So, particularly when it comes to adaptive immune system, which is essentially active immune system, it has a memory. What does this mean? Is they remember next time, say, the pathogen attacks, the mechanism is triggered directly. So, key players T cells, B cells and antibodies are part of adaptive active immune system. So, what are T cells exactly? So, T cells or T lymphocytes are a type of white blood cells that plays a central role in the adaptive immune system. They are called T cells because they mature in the thymus. So, T, to a certain extent, remember, T is for thymus here, T cells, because they mature and say get trained in the thymus part. Main functions of T cells: recognize and kill infected or abnormal cells, help activate and direct other immune cells, maintain immune tolerance and prevent autoimmune diseases, form long-term memory for future responses. So, there are memory T cells, there are regulatory T cells, etc. There are types of T cells. Let us look at some of the types, important types here. CD4 helper T cells, TH cells these are called. So, means most of the time, you must have seen these names in news, because they are often in news because they coordinate immune response by releasing signaling molecules, that is cytokines. There are many subtypes of CD4 helper T cells as well. There is Th1, Th2, Th17 is also often in news. Then there is TFH, follicular helper, help B cells mature in lymph nodes. That's the sort of working of TFH. Then there is CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells or TC cells, function directly kill infected or cancerous or damaged cells. How they kill the invading pathogens? The first and foremost, they release perforin, makes holes in target cell membranes, and then there is release granzymes which triggers apoptosis, programmed cell death. So, apoptosis is a programmed cell death. These are your body's assassins for inferior, infected and tumor cells. So, there are CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells as well. Then there are regulatory T cells that we have already seen so much about in this particular article, regulatory T cells, because they prevent autoimmune diseases, autoimmunity. Then there are memory T cells as well. They remember past infections for faster, stronger response if the pathogen invades next time. So, there are central memory T cells, then there are effector memory T cells as well. So, remember these 4 types of T cells, important from the perspective of prelims here, very, very vital. Then there are B cells as well. So, B cells or B lymphocytes are white blood cells that originate and mature in bone marrow. Remember that T cells originate and mature in thymus, while B cells originate and mature in bone marrow. B is for bone marrow, remember, are responsible for humoral immunity involving antibodies in body fluids. They recognize specific antigens, foreign molecules, and respond by producing antibodies or by becoming memory B cells that protect you long term. So, T cells and B cells are sort of have memory. They are part of active adaptive immune system of our own body. So, let us look at some of the basics of Nobel Prize itself. So, as I earlier said, Nobel Prize was established through the will of Alfred Nobel way back in 1900s. In his will written in 1895, a year before his death, he left most of his fortune to create a series of prizes for those who conferred the greatest benefit to the mankind. First Nobel obviously was awarded way back in 1901. Fields in which Nobel Prizes are awarded, there is physics, chemistry, physiology or medicine, there is literature, peace. In 1969, economic sciences was added. So, essentially, let's look at some of the very interesting facts when it comes to Nobel Prizes. So, only 5 individuals have been awarded the Nobel Prize twice. Who are those 5 individuals? The first and foremost, very revolutionary scientist, Marie Curie. So, in 1903, Marie Curie was awarded Nobel Prize in Physics, she shared it with, say, her husband. Then in 1911 also she won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry as a sole recipient. She is the only person to win in 2 different scientific fields. She is the only person to achieve this particular field. Very, very revolutionary scientist of her times. Linus Pauling is another scientist who has won Nobel Prize twice. 1954 he won it in chemistry, and then in 1962 for Peace Prize. He is the only person to win 2 unshared Nobel Prizes. Remember that, Linus Pauling. Then there is a John Bardeen as well. In 1956 he won it in physics, and in 1972 he also again won in physics itself. He is the only person to win the Nobel Prize in physics twice. So, in physics, only scientist to win Nobel Prize twice is John Bardeen. Remember some of these facts, important from the perspective of prelims. Friedrich Sanger is also is the scientist who actually won the Nobel twice, particularly in chemistry. So, in 1958 and 1980 he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry twice. So, there is K. Barry Sharpless as well. In 2001 he won it in chemistry, and in 2022 he won it in chemistry again. So, he is one of the 2 people to win Nobel Prize in chemistry twice. So, who is the other person to win Nobel Prize in chemistry twice? Friedrich Sanger. So, Friedrich Sanger and K. Barry Sharpless are these 2 scientists who have won the Nobel Prize twice in same field, chemistry. Additionally, 2 organizations have won the Nobel Peace Prize multiple times. For example, there is ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, won 3 times particularly in 1917, 1944 and 1963. Office of the United Nations Human Commissioner for Refugees won twice in 1954 and 1981 as well. So some of the notable Nobel Prize winners from India, there is Rabindranath Tagore way back in literature in 1913 for his work on Gitanjali. There is C.V. Raman way back in 1913, physics particularly for his discovery of say Raman effect, scattering of light, Raman scattering in particular. The first Asian to win the Nobel Prize in Sciences, none other than our C.V. Raman. Then there is Mother Teresa for peace, she won it in 1975, missionary work in charities in Kolkata particularly. So there is Amartya Sen, Economic Sciences in 1998, Venkatraman Ramakrishnan, Chemistry in 2009, studies on the structure of the ribosome particularly, Kailash Satyarthi in recent times, and then there is Abhijit Banerjee in Economic Sciences again in 2019 as well. These are some notable personalities from India who have won the Nobel Prizes. By the way, why we don't see that many Nobel laureates from India? Why India particularly lacks when it comes to say these particular very important global prizes? So just comment in comment section what are some of the reasons for the lack of Nobel prizes for Indian scientists, and this also is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So the second important article that we are going to discuss is about START treaty. Could the US and Russia extend last nuclear weapons treaty? So essentially START is a treaty, arms control treaty in particularly between US and Russia, nuclear arms, strategic weapons in particular. So it is one of the last treaties between these two powerful countries. So particularly the US president on Sunday said Russian President Putin's offer to voluntarily maintain the limits for a year on deployed strategic nuclear weapons sounds like a good idea. That's the words of Trump, but it is very unpredictable whether he will extend that particular treaty or not. It is very difficult to say, but essentially that particular START treaty, the new START treaty, which will expire in say February 2026, it needs to be extended so that the nuclear proliferation threat is subsided. Having long declined to address arms control in isolation, Putin made the offer based on new START treaty, the last remaining Russia-US arms control treaty. So there are many bilateral treaties between these two nuclear weapon countries. So essentially to maintain some sort of strategic balance between the nuclear armed rivals, they have actually all these important treaties right from say the Cuban Missile Crisis, so in 1950s and 60s. So from that time onwards, for the sake of say avoiding the nuclear proliferation and to avoid say the proliferation of nuclear weapons themselves, they actually have these bilateral treaties. But in recent times, there are multiple strains between the bilateral relationship between the US and Russia. So in this regard, in recent times we have seen, particularly in 2019, the INF treaty was actually discarded. After that, now although the new START treaty actually extended until 2026 in 2021 itself, whether it will be extended further or not is a issue. And although both these countries have actually shown the interest in expanding or extending this particular treaty. So let's look at what exactly is the START treaty. START is Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty and its significance. Let's look at the significance as well. So the new START, the last remaining US-Russia arms control treaty, was signed by then President Barack Obama and Medvedev of Russia in 2010, which came into force in 2011. It was extended for 5 years way back in 2020 by Putin and US President at that point of time, Joe Biden as well. The treaty concerns strategic weapons. So what exactly are the strategic weapons? They are usually long range weapons designed to influence the outcome of the war. So that's the strategic weapons. That's the meaning of it. They will decide the outcome in case the war happens. Not merely a battle, by destroying the power centers, command and control facilities or key infrastructure. So that's the key here. They will decide or they will influence the outcome of the war, not just battle. So not just one battle, but overall outcome of the war itself is decided through these strategic weapons. So essentially, means this particular START treaty is to actually control these strategic weapons, nuclear weapons essentially. So it was actually signed way back in 2011. It was extended further in 2021 by 5 years, and now it will expire on February 5, 2026. So nuclear arsenal, Russia and the US together have about 87% of global inventory of nuclear weapons. Remember that. even now 87% of global inventory of say nuclear weapons is with Russia and US, enough to destroy the world many times over. Russia has 5459 nuclear warheads, while US has almost 5177 according to Federation of American Scientists, FAS. So their arms control treaties were born out of fear of nuclear war after the Cuban Missile Crisis, as I earlier said. So greater transparency about the opponent's arsenal was intended to reduce the scope for misunderstanding and slow the arms race. So Cuban Missile Crisis is the one event where actually nuclear war was inevitable to certain extent. World was on the verge of nuclear apocalypse, but somehow both countries got the sense, or rather I will say the good sense prevailed at that point of time. And after that, for the sake of greater transparency and and actually reduce the scope for say misunderstanding, the arms race was slowed down to certain extent. Although it was not eliminated altogether, there was still arms race between the US and Russia, but it was slowed down further. Now, with all major nuclear powers seeking to modernize arsenal, the Russia and the West at strategic loggerheads for over a decade. Means there is ongoing Russia-Ukraine warfare currently happening, not least over Moscow's war in Ukraine. The treaties have almost all crumbled away, each side blaming the other for the crumbling of these particular treaties. So what exactly is the issue when it comes to extension of say the New START treaty? Putin said Washington's preparation for deploying interceptors in space could undermine efforts to maintain the status quo. Putin wants to maintain the status quo. That is the foremost reason he gives when it comes to Russia-Ukraine war. Now also he is suggesting that say Trump's Golden Dome project, 175 billion Golden Dome project, which would create a network of perhaps hundreds of satellites to detect, track and potentially intercept incoming missile, will actually ease the problem for Putin. So he actually objects to this particular deployment of interceptors in space through say project Golden Dome. Russia and US both have new weapon systems that other system says are essentially strategic. Putin said US considers the Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missile is a strategic weapon. Russia also has the Kinzhal maneuverable ballistic missile and avant-garde nuclear capable hypersonic boost glide vehicles as well. So many times Russia or even US doesn't want to include these particular very strategic weapons under these particular treaties. So Russia is objecting to US considering say Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missile as a strategic weapon. We are going to see what exactly is this Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missile. Very important. Many times UPSC ask defense related questions directly nowadays. So you must know what exactly is this missile. Then there are issues of tactical nuclear weapons as well. Many times usually short range, designed for use on battlefield and generally left out of nuclear weapons treaties. So these tactical nuclear weapons are very much short range weapons. These are not part of any of the nuclear weapons treaties. Russia has about 1477 non-strategic warheads, while US has about 200 according to FS. Putin has specifically mentioned tactical nuclear weapons as an issue as well. So submarines, the US has more strategic nuclear submarines than Russia. That is also an issue Putin often highlights. Then there is all important issue of China first and foremost. Putin has said the US wants Moscow to get its ally China involved in arms control, though Moscow says it is up to Beijing that if China is involved, Britain, France should be too. So if China is involved, you should involve Britain and France as well. So the FAS estimates China has about 600 nuclear warheads and rising. But Beijing says it does not want to enter negotiation with countries that have much bigger arsenal. So when there is a parity between say the a number of arsenals, nuclear warheads, until then Beijing will not negotiate any of these arms reduction treaties. So that's the stance taken by China. But definitely when it comes to US worries, the Chinese development of nuclear warheads is always an issue, not just for US but also for India, and its overall South Asian neighborhood. So essentially if the US insists on the inclusion of China in the extension of New START treaty, Moscow also says you should include, say, Britain and France as well in this particular treaty, because they also have their own nuclear warheads and arsenals. Nuclear testing is also an issue. It is emerging as an issue. Russia has repeatedly raised concerns in public about possible resumption of nuclear testing. During Trump's first term as president from 2017 to 2021, his administration discussed whether or not to conduct first US nuclear test since 1992. Putin said on October 2 that Russia would carry out a nuclear test if another nuclear power did so. So that is also an issue. Many times, Trump, being Trump, he may test a nuclear weapon again on US soil. So, but Putin again objects. If there are certain conditions, there are certain issues he want to address before extending this New START treaty further. So, we are going to see whether it is extended or not. But let's look at, some of the important terms here. The Golden Dome project, we have all seen what exactly is this project. So, Golden Dome project is a proposed multi-layer defense system for the United States. It is like Iron Dome of Israel, intended to detect, destroy various foreign threats, particularly ballistic, hypersonic and cruise missiles. It involves, it is sort of a comprehensive shield like an Iron Dome. It is space-based focus. Obviously, there will be space interceptors, satellites in space. A key component is a global constellation of satellites equipped with advanced sensors and space-based interceptor missiles to detect and destroy threats early in their flight. But there are some concerns associated with that particular project, actually expressed by Mr. Putin of Russia. There is Oreshnik missile also mentioned in the article. So, Oreshnik missile is a recently introduced Russian intermediate range ballistic missile. So, it is sort of power projection of Russia. Oreshnik missile. What are some of the key features? It is intermediate range ballistic missile with a reported range of up to approximately 5,000 kilometers, hypersonic speed of Mach 10 times the speed of sound, 1 Mach sort of speed of sound, which classifies it as a hypersonic weapon. Multiple warheads, it is a MIRV, multiple warheads, it can carry multiple warheads, it can carry multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRV payload, typically consisting of 6 warheads or ammunitions which can strike separate targets at the same time. Hard to intercept, operational use, origin, obviously, it is believed to be derivative of the previously tested RS-26 Rubiz intercontinental ballistic missile. So, it is some sort of variant of ICBM. It is viewed by some analysts as a strategic weapon designed to send a political signal of Russia's advanced missile capabilities, particularly in the light of termination of intermediate range nuclear force treaty. So, there is INF treaty, as I earlier said, which was actually discarded way back in Trump's first term. So, US has withdrawn that from that particular treaty way back in 2019. So, INF treaty, let's look at the basics of the INF treaty. The INF treaty was a landmark Cold War era arms control agreement between the US and Soviet Union, Russia, to eliminate entire class of nuclear weapons. Essentially, it was signed way back in 1987, entered into force in 1988. US has withdrawn in 2019 itself. So, main objective is to eliminate all ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with range between 500 and 5,500 kilometers, short and intermediate range, along with their launchers and support equipment. There is a collapse of the treaty. Why particularly, US withdrawn from this particular INF treaty, very important treaty in 2019. In 2010s, US accused Russia of violating the treaty by developing and deploying a missile system. Russia denied the allegation and accused the US of its own violations. In 2019, US formally withdrawn from this particular treaty, ending the treaty itself. So, this is very interesting practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Another important practice question, important from the perspective of prelims here, defense related, updates. So, very important article. The third important article that we are going to discuss about securities transaction tax and its constitutionality. So, now the Supreme Court will decide whether the securities transaction tax is a constitutional or not, because the petition has been filed against this particular provision of Finance Act of 2004. So, the Supreme Court of India on Monday decided to examine the plea challenging the constitutional validity of the securities transaction tax, a direct tax levied on securities transaction through listed stock exchange as imposed under the Finance Act of 2004. So, the STT is a direct tax imposed on the exchange or transactions that happen on the stock exchanges like BSE, NSE, etc. So it is like a TDS, tax deducted at source. So whether there is a profit or not, the STT will apply if you do the transaction on the stock market. So that's the essence here of the STT. A bench headed by JB Pardiwala issued a formal notice to the Union government through the Ministry of Finance on the petition filed. Petitioners who contended that STT violated fundamental rights to equality and to trade or even livelihood and the basic right to live with dignity. So obviously it is sort of very far-fetched sort of assumptions that have been taken up. But let's see whether Supreme Court will buy these assumptions or not, because the Supreme Court itself will now decide the constitutionality of this particular provision of 2004 of Finance Act of 2004 in particular. So STT, the petition alleges that they challenge the legality of STT itself. So the recent petitions has been found questioning the legality of the STT imposed on stock market participants. The petitioner, a stock market trader, clarified that the challenge is not based on the quantum of the tax, but rather on legal and constitutional grounds. So that's why constitutionality, the challenge to constitutionality of STT has been accepted by the Supreme Court now, because they are not challenging based on the quantum of the tax which is imposed on the transactions, but rather on the legal and constitutional grounds, not a protest against high taxation. So the trader, who is the petitioner, stock trader in particular, says that it is not a protest against the high taxation. He emphasized that the issue was not about increase in taxation or that tax rates were excessive. Instead, the challenge is focused on the principles underlying STT itself and whether it aligns with fair taxation practices or not. Fair taxation practices where right to equality, right to profession is ensured essentially. Allegation of double taxation. So it is classic criticism of STT. Many times it is considered as a part of sort of a double taxation, because there is capital gains tax on profit as well, and you are actually imposing on the transaction there is STT. So sort of sometimes on the stock exchange it feels like sort of a double taxation. One of the key arguments in the plea is STT violates the principle of double taxation. The petitioner pays the capital gains tax on profit earned from stock market transactions and then also has to pay STT on the same transaction. So it is sort of a double taxation. This, according to petitioner, results in taxing the same income twice, which is against the spirit of fair taxation. So it is against the spirit of fair taxation because you are essentially taxing the same amount twice. Tax on profession, not profit. So essentially the petitioner, another argument of the petitioner is the contention raised by the petitioner is STT is a unique among Indian taxes because it is levied simply for carrying out the profession of trading regardless of profit or loss. So if you trade on the stock market, you will have to pay this particular tax. So it is sort of a tax on profession itself. So every tax in India is calculated on the profit at the year end, but STT is imposed on each transaction even if the trader ends up incurring losses. So even if there is loss to the trader, he or she has to pay that particular STT. So it is sort of tax on a profession, not on a profit, although every tax in India is on profit. That's the contention of the petitioner, by the way. It makes the tax more punitive and deterrent in nature, particularly for active traders and market participants as well, because whether there is a profit or not, you have to pay that STT no matter what. No adjustment or refund like TDS. Even if the government calls it like a TDS, but it is not exactly like a TDS, because STT with TDS, which is imposed on salaried individuals, it is like a TDS, while TDS is refundable or adjustable against the total tax liability at the end of the financial year. STT has no such provision. So STT, you will not get a refund of STT, that is the case. STT was introduced in 2004 particularly to counter tax evasion in the stock market. It was meant to act like a TDS mechanism, but unlike TDS, which can be refunded or adjusted, STT has to be paid irrespective of income, profit or tax liability. That's the contention. Although it is sort of a counter mechanism to tax evasion on the stock market, To a certain extent, it is not like tedious because you will not get a refund of it. Call for legal review. The petitioner calls for judicial review of the legality of STT, questioning its compliance with constitutional and tax principles, fair taxation in particular. It highlights how the tax in its current form places disproportionate burden on stock traders, especially those operating even at a loss. The case brings into focus broader debate on tax fairness, policy consistency for different category of taxpayers in India. So, what exactly is this security transaction tax? We have already seen that. So, it is a direct tax levied on the purchase and sale of security transaction on the stock market, introduced way back in 2004. Obviously, objective is to simplify the taxation of securities transaction, to prevent tax avoidance particularly, and to act as a form of TDS for traders. So, who pays STT? Investors, traders also pay STT. Stockbrokers who collect the STT, then they will deposit with the government. Where STT is applicable? On equity shares, derivatives, equity oriented mutual funds. So, on all recognized stock exchanges in India, STT is applicable. So, how STT is taxed? By the way, STTs are not deductible as a business expense for capital gains purposes, except in case of business income. For traders showing gains as a business income, STT can be claimed as a deduction as well. So, that is why it feels like a tedious. Criticism of STT, as I said, it is some sort of double taxation applied even in loss making trades as well. So, international context, see, many times you will not find a provision like STT in other jurisdiction, although in France and UK you have the provisions like stamp duty, but it is very unique to India. How STT is different from capital gains tax? This is also very, very important. So, as I earlier also mentioned, how capital gains tax is fundamentally different from STT. Nature of tax is important to understand as a differentiating factor here between STT and capital gains tax. So, STT is a transaction based tax, while capital gains tax is an income based tax, which is essentially taxed on the profit. So, when it is charged at the time of transaction, buy and sale on the stock exchange, that is where STT is actually charged, while when it comes to capital gains tax, at the time of profit realization only on the sale of asset, the capital gains tax is imposed. So, applicable on purchase sale of listed securities on the stock exchanges, profit or gain from the sale of capital assets when it comes to capital gains tax. See, another important part here is purpose of the tax. When it comes to STT, what is the purpose of STT? To prevent tax evasion and track trading activities. When it comes to capital gains tax, to tax profits made from investment or asset values. So, we actually sort of taxing the profit part when it comes to capital gains tax. Let us look at the example. For example, you buy a share worth of 1 lakh rupees and sell them on the stock market for say 1,20,000 rupees. Now, when you buy as well as sell, you have to pay STT, that is securities transaction tax. For example, if it is 0.1%, then at each of these transactions you have to pay this 0.1% STT. So, even if you made say no profit at all, you have to pay STT. On the other hand, in this particular case, you made the profit of say 20,000. On this particular profit, you have to pay now the capital gains tax. So, you get the point here through this particular example, how STT is different from say capital gains tax, and it feels like a very much a double taxation. So, we are going to see what sort of judgment the Supreme Court gives in this particular deciding the constitutionality of STT. Very interesting judgment, very interesting petition, by the way. So, this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So, another important article that we are going to discuss is about ensure compliance on drug quality standards. So, in recent times we have seen drug related, particularly cold cough syrup related deaths in MP. So, when it comes to update in that regard, the tragedy has prompted precautionary bans in multiple states now, including Kerala. There are authorities investigating the highly toxic contamination in these cold syrups. So, essentially more than 15 to 18 children have been died due to consumption of contaminated cold syrup. So, the firms that makes these sort of poor quality drugs must face consequences. That is really important. We must fix the accountability part. We must have the transparency part. See, most of the time India's generic medicine sector, the pharmaceutical sector is world's envy, but at the same time quality control standards are often often, the casualty of this particular framework. So the current debate, it should ensure the transparency and accountability mechanism should be in place, so that we should not, repeat such sort of very heinous incidences. So first and foremost, ensuring quality in Atmanirbhar Bharat, lessons for the cough syrup controversy. So for Atmanirbhar Bharat, we must have self-reliant. For Atmanirbhar Bharat, that is self-reliant India, we must have healthy population with good quality control of drugs. However, achieving it requires not just the scale of production, but also sustained focus on quality control, especially in critical sectors like pharmaceuticals. So in critical sectors, we must have, quality control measures. Although, those quality control measures are operational to certain extent, they are not working properly, it seems. So there are recurring concerns when it comes to cough syrup quality. India's pharmaceutical industry, despite its ambition to lead globally, has faced repeated quality issues, particularly concerning cough syrups. So in the most recent incident, suspicions arose over the cold reef cough syrup after the deaths of at least 16 children in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. So what is the reason behind, the contamination? It is essentially detection of diethylene glycol in samples. So diethylene glycol is sort of, organic compound which is toxic to humans. So following the incidents in Tamil Nadu Drugs Control Department, it initiated a test on sample of cold reef. Their investigation found DEG, that is diethylene glycol, in the cold reef samples, a toxic chemical above permissible limit in certain of the batches of the cold reef. So this particular chemical was found in the cold reef cough syrup. So the syrup was manufactured by a private pharmaceutical firm, raising concerns about its compliance with safety norms. So what sort of safety norms this particular private pharmaceutical firm followed, and whether there is enough checking of the facilities or not, is a question here. Interestingly, while the Union Health Ministry initially ruled out the presence of DEG in samples tested from Rajasthan and MP, Tamil Nadu's findings pointed to contamination in batch within its own jurisdiction as well. So GMP violations and contaminated raw materials. See, there is good manufacturing practices and good laboratory practices under Schedule M of Drugs Control Act to certain extent, which are operational in India. The contaminated batch was reportedly produced using non-pharmaceutical grade propylene glycol, a solvent used in many medicine. So propylene glycol, non-pharmacopoeial grade was used in this particular samples. That's what caused the contamination. This substandard ingredient is believed to have introduced DEG and ethylene glycol, both nephrotoxic substances known to damage the kidneys. So both propylene glycol is responsible for the introduction of DEG as well as ethylene glycol in this particular cold reef syrups. So regulatory action and legal consequences in this regard. In response to the findings, CDSCO, that is Central Drugs Standard Control Organization, recommended cancellation of firm's manufacturing license. That is good step, by the way. The regulatory crackdown comes as a part of broader push by Union Health Ministry to tighten the compliance with revised Schedule M norms which govern drug manufacturing standards in India. Meanwhile, doctor in Madhya Pradesh who had reportedly recommended the cold reef syrup to many of the deceased children has been arrested as well, further intensified the fallout from this particular incident. So how we can strengthen India's pharmaceutical framework? So it is indeed a wake-up call for India's Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India mission. So they cannot be pursued on the cost of public safety and global trust. Very important, very true. Building a robust, transparent and enforceable quality control system must be a top priority for pharmaceutical industry, which is trusted pharmacy of the world. India must adopt a zero tolerance approach to poor quality drugs, going beyond reactive measures taken only after the tragedies occur. So we must move to more proactive approaches. Through the framework of good laboratory practices already exist, the issues lies in the lack of strict enforcement. So there are, GMP and GLP practices, as I earlier said. The most important thing is enforcement is the issue. Regular unannounced inspection and rigorous testing of drug batches should be made standard practice, the government must send a clear and uncompromising message across the pharmaceutical sector that any lapse in safety and quality will result in strict consequences, prioritizing public health and trust above all else. So, let's look at the basic of diethylene glycol. So, as I earlier said, it is organic compound, colorless, odorless, although sweet tasting, commonly used as a solvent and antifreeze in industrial applications. So, it is not at all used for the medical applications. Remember that it is some sort of solvent and antifreeze used particularly in industrial applications like paints, brake fluids, lubricants, cosmetics in small quantities. In cosmetics, it is used in very small quantities. Chemical formula, remember the chemical formula C4H10O3, diethylene glycol. Then there are toxicity and health risk associated effects on of DEG poisoning include kidney failure, nephrotoxicity, liver damage, neurological damage, metabolical acidosis is there. Deaths particularly in children is also observed. It is not for humans, remember that. Contamination in medicines is observed because many times use of pharmaceutical grade solvents like industrial grade propylene glycol contaminated with DEG is responsible for, say, the contamination of overall the medicine itself. So, lack of quality control in drug manufacturing, regulatory failures are also responsible for the contamination in medicines. So, ethylene glycol similar, very similar, colorless, odorless, sweet tasting, again organic compound widely used as an antifreeze in the manufacturing of polyesters, plastics and resins. Its chemical formula is C2H6O2. Obviously, it is toxic and there are health risks associated as well, very similar to diethylene glycol. Contamination in pharmaceuticals similar to very much DEG. So, what are revised Schedule M norms, by the way? Schedule M is a part of Drugs and Cosmetics Rules of 1945 in India. It sets out good manufacturing practices that pharmaceutical manufacturers must follow to ensure the quality, safety and efficacy of drugs produced in the country. So, Schedule M norms are part of Drugs and Cosmetics Rules of 1945, which gives good manufacturing practices, good laboratory practices. The implementation part again is where the problem is. So, there are revised Schedule M norms as well. For example, strict requirement for manufacturing premises, upgrade equipment standard, then there are enhanced documentation, record keeping, improved personnel training, strengthened quality control and testing, enhanced accountability as well. So, what lacks is implementation. So, that is where we have to focus on. So, this is very important practice question for you, just comment your answer in the comment section. So, in decoded section particularly, we are going to discuss a very important article about reforming passive euthanasia in India. So, in June particularly, the UK's House of Commons passed Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill, reigniting a global conversation about euthanasia. So, it is sort of legalizing the steps toward legalizing active euthanasia. In June, the UK's House of Commons passed this particular bill, reigniting the global debate in that regard. The proposed law permits physician-assisted dying for mentally competent adults expected to live fewer than 6 months, subject to medical certification and oversight by national panel as well. So, although it allowed the active, physician-assisted dying for mentally competent adults who has, say, just 6 months to live or less than that, subject to medical sort of certifications oversight by national level. While it is awaiting approval from the House of Lords, the bill marks the bold legal and moral step that many Western countries have embraced in recent times. So, while India has recognized passive euthanasia through a series of Supreme Court judgments, it has consciously drawn a line against active euthanasia as well. So, there is very cautious steps which has been taken by the judiciary when it comes to euthanasia debate. Although Supreme Court through its judgments have actually legalized passive euthanasia, but it is the active euthanasia is where it has drawn the line. Active euthanasia in India is illegal. Cultural values, institutional capacity and socio-economic conditions make it unlikely that India will mirror the UK's path at all, but that does not mean it should remain static. So, essentially, although the debate has been reignited, we can reform the overall passive euthanasia system, the system of living will that we have currently. But before that, let's look at the judgments itself, which actually, legalize the passive euthanasia in India. So, India's legal stance on passive euthanasia has evolved through landmark Supreme Court judgments, particularly focusing on the right to die with dignity under Article 21 of the Constitution. So, Article 21 of our Constitution gives us a right to life with dignity, but right to die with dignity is also part of Article 21, right to life. So, there is very famous, Aruna Shanbag case of 2011. So, essentially, Aruna Shanbag was a nurse who was, raped way back in 1980s. She was, after this particular assault, she was left in a vegetative state for almost 37 years. So, she was in a persistent vegetative state for almost 37 years after a brutal assault and rape. A friend filed a petition seeking permission for passive euthanasia at that point of time. Passive euthanasia, withdrawal of life support, although, the hospital in which she was cared for, the nurses there actually opposed this particular plea of passive euthanasia in this particular case. Supreme Court verdict in this regard is very much a revolutionary verdict. The court rejected euthanasia for Aruna, but laid down legal guidelines permitting passive euthanasia in exceptional cases, introduced the best interest test, and required High Court approval before the life support could be withdrawn. So, in this particular case, what are the key takeaways? Passive euthanasia was legalized under strict conditions. Court distinguished passive withdrawing treatment from active euthanasia, that is administering lethal injection or drugs, which remains illegal in India. So, it actually legalized the passive euthanasia. So, the second important case is Common Cause case of 2018 as well. Essentially, NGO Common Cause filed PIL seeking the recognition of right to die with dignity and legal validity of living wills, advanced directives. So, Supreme Court verdict in that regard, it gave right to die with dignity is a fundamental right under Article 21, very true. Passive euthanasia was fully legalized in India. Living wills, advanced directives were recognized and made legally valid. So, living wills were made legally valid in Common Cause case of 2018. It laid down detailed procedures or guidelines for the living will to be executed. Executing a living will, medical board review, there is approval by judicial magistrate as well. So, these are some of the procedural guidelines given in that particular Common Cause case, which gave us which legalized the living will, advanced directives procedure. So, recent developments in that regard, in January 23, the Supreme Court relaxed the guidelines for passive euthanasia and living wills to make the process more practical. So, this is something about the background of, say, the euthanasia debate. But let us look at the article now, what it argues. So, it argues that passive euthanasia, although legalized, it is still a practical inaccessibility, which passive euthanasia allows withdrawal of life support treatment to let death take its natural course, but which is legal in India. It is not considered killing, but rather a human acceptance of death when medical intervention only prolongs the suffering. However, procedural hurdles remain, such as requirement of advance directives, multiple medical board approvals, and judicial oversight makes actual implementation very slow and impractical. Unlike UK's structured healthcare system, India's fragmented and under-resourced system lacks the institutional support needed for constant end-of-life care. Cultural factors like strong family ties, religious belief, and low awareness further complicate such decisions. How many people does know about living wills? And even if there is a living will, there are pretty much complications when it comes to compliance part. So, calls for active euthanasia raise concerns about potential misuse, especially in the context where palliative care is weak and financial pressures may coerce vulnerable individuals into choosing death. This poses serious risk of ethical and social issues. So, active euthanasia obviously has downsides when it comes to India, because in India particularly the palliative care is weak. Our out-of-pocket expenditure on health is very high. So, in this case, there are many ethical and social risks of allowing the active euthanasia. The passive euthanasia debate itself is complicated nowadays because of the compliance burden associated with living wills. Finally, while Article 21 of the Constitution includes the right to die with dignity, the Supreme Court maintains a clear boundary between allowing death and actively causing it. So, essentially there is a clear distinction between the active and passive euthanasia. India's cautious, ethically conservative stance reflects its complex social and healthcare realities. That is very true. So, charting its own course. So, in this regard, what sort of reforms we can actually implement in the passive euthanasia debate? Rather than legalizing active euthanasia, India should focus on making passive euthanasia process more efficient and humane. That is true. A national digital portal for registering advance directives linked with Aadhaar for verification is proposed. That is also good. Hospital ethics committee, including doctors, a palliative care expert and a neutral member, should be given power to approve withdrawal of life support within 48 hours. More complex cases can be escalated further review as well. While earlier suggestions included state level ombudsmen, such mechanisms have proven slow and ineffective in other sectors. A better option may be decentralized review system, independent medical auditors or health commissioners. To prevent misuse, mandatory safeguards should remain a 7-day cooling off period, psychological counseling and palliative care review. These measures follow international standards and help protect the rights of vulnerable patients. So, these are some of the reforms suggested in the passive euthanasia debate. So, in conclusion, we can say India's constitutional promise of dignity in life must extend to dignity in dying as well. A focus on digital procedures, local hospital-based ethics review and light yet effective oversight can ensure end-of-life decisions which are both accessible and safeguarded against misuses. Although we need not follow the UK's path of active euthanasia, we must urgently reform the passive euthanasia through, say, hospital-based ethics review and light yet effective oversight. Such reforms would align with India's cultural values, respect patient autonomy and prevent exploitation as well. To support this shift, medical education must include training in end-of-life care, covering both legal and ethical aspects. Additionally, public awareness campaigns are essential to encourage open conversations about advanced care planning. Without public understanding and trust, even well-designed laws will remain underused if the public awareness is an issue. So, this is very important practice question for you. That's it from my side and stay tuned for another edition of Daily News Analysis. Thank you.